Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. This week, we tune into the ways of Washington. In the second half of our show, we'll be joined by Lee Goodman, member and former chair of the Federal Election Commission, who explains why sometimes gridlock is your friend. Up first, we're pleased to welcome Avik Roy, president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. Avik, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Bill. It's great to be with you.
Avik, I understand you've embarked on a new endeavor. Why does the country need yet another think tank? Aren't we already up to our ears in professional policy advocates of one stripe or another?
Yeah, well, you could definitely say that. And having been in the think tank world for a good chunk of the last several years, I understand what think tanks are doing. The way I look at it, Bill, is this. Have think tanks been working? Particularly as a conservative, have they been working? And the way I ask that question to a lot of my friends is, and I'll ask you, Bill, at the federal level, over the last 25 years, how many transformative pieces of legislation have passed Congress and been signed by the president? And I mean transformative from the free market point of view, not from the liberal point of view. Obviously, we know things like Obamacare have been passed. But what about on the free market side? What do you think's happened in the last 25 years that Congress has passed and the president has signed?
It's been a while.
Can you think of anything?
The last reforms I can think of is really back under Carter and Reagan.
It's funny, when I ask this question, a lot of times people will say welfare reform, because that was in 1996.
Okay.
But, welfare reform, I think the reaction you just had is a fair one, right? Because welfare reform was, A, it's a small piece of the budget. B, the reforms of 1996 have been undermined considerably by some things that have happened under the Obama administration, particularly the stimulus bill, which did a lot to unwind the work requirements in the 1996 welfare reform. But the point is, that's pretty thin gruel, right? So over the last 25 years, you've had a lot of think tanks out there. They've raised billions of dollars from donors, and they've employed a lot of very bright and talented scholars who've worked very hard. But the end result for the last 25 years, in terms of federal legislation that's been transformative, that's made the country better, that's really moved the needle in terms of liberating the economy from the federal government, it's been pretty small.
Yeah, it's been since telecom deregulation that we've really had that kind of signature legislation.
Yeah, telecom deregulation is a good example of something maybe that doesn't get as much attention as welfare reform, but that did lay the groundwork for the internet economy and things like that. That's probably one that actually I think you're the first to bring that one up, but that's a good example of something that maybe Congress doesn't get enough credit for. But here's the thing. In both of those cases, the telecom deregulation and welfare reform, both of those were passed by a Republican Congress and signed into law by a Democratic president. And I think what's interesting about that, let's take particularly the case of welfare reform. When welfare reform was kind of being debated in the 90s, what was interesting about it, of course, is Bill Clinton in 92 campaigned on welfare reform, right? He said, we've got to end welfare as we know it. And there was a whole movement on the center left, the people at the New Republic, the Democratic Leadership Council, Bill Clinton. They had all been persuaded by a guy named Charles Murray, who'd written a book in the 80s called Losing Ground, that had shown that the welfare system of 1965 that LBJ signed into law wasn't working. The center-left never bought into the rights arguments about big government versus small government, or about the Constitution having certain powers that it's granted to Congress, which welfare either was faithful to or not. But those debates were not important to the center-left. What was important to the center-left, that was persuasive to the center-left, was Charles Murray's argument, his economic argument, his empirical argument, that the welfare system of 1965 and the ensuing decades wasn't working, and that it needed to be fixed if we shared the goal of lifting people out of poverty and bringing them into the workforce.
And that seems to be the linchpin of what you're doing here, isn't it?
That's right. So the insight I draw from that question I asked you, what have we actually gotten done in the last 25 years? And noticing that the one thing we've gotten done is the one thing where we actually persuaded empirically the center left, not the hard left, which fought welfare reform tooth and nail in the 90s, as you remember. But the center left was persuaded by the empirical arguments made by Charles Murray and others that the welfare system wasn't working. And so the idea behind this new think tank is to say, where can we find common ground with red state Democrats and the center left? I think we have done a great job in recent years of having these purer than thou contests where we've emphasized whether we think certain people are more ideologically orthodox or not. That's been really successful, I guess you could say, if you define success by people feeling like they have to toe the line on everything. But at the end of the day, you're not going to pass legislation through Congress and get it enacted into law unless you get 60 people in the Senate to vote for it. And you're not getting 60 people in the Senate to vote for something unless your arguments are not purely ideological. You also have to make empirical, pragmatic arguments to sell people who are not with you ideologically that free markets can lift people out of poverty, that they can enhance economic mobility, they can make a difference for people who are at the bottom half of the ladder.
So, Avik, you've explicitly stated that FREOPP is going to look at public policy from the perspective of citizens with incomes or wealth below the U.S. median, which should be music to the ears of the center left. According to the Tax Foundation, that group carries less than 3% of our nation's income tax burden. Doesn't that imply that more free stuff paid for with someone else's money is always in their best interests?
Well, no. I mean, it all depends on what you mean, right? So if you look at the world in a static way, where economics is all about who gets the goodies and how we redistribute the goodies, well, then yes, I can understand why that type of statistic might be persuasive to you. But the fact is, most people want to be more successful. They want to have a better living. They want to make a better living in particular for their children. And so the question is, how can we help people do that? That's a universal aspiration. And by the way, I should also mention that the phrase equal opportunity, the idea that in America, we're not a place of special privileges. We're a place where if you, through hard work and ability and pluck, you can make it regardless of how you got here, where you came from, what your station in life was when you were born. That idea is something that's widely shared among liberals, conservatives, and free marketeers, and everyone in between. Now, we may disagree as to how to achieve equal opportunity, but that basic principle that at the starting gate, we're all on the same line, and we're not going to guarantee the results, but we're going to make sure that you have the ability to succeed. That's an important principle that's shared by everyone. And so a big part of our thinking is, again, you asked the question, why do we need another think tank? What I think the think tank ecosystem is not doing well is it's not finding ways to find common ground between the left and the right, between Democrats and Republicans, finding policies that might work and be appealing to a broader range of policymakers. Because, again, you need 60 votes in the Senate to get somewhere. So maybe there's, another form of welfare reform or another form of tax reform where, okay, maybe that tax reform means, since, as you noted, most of the people who pay taxes are upper income, any type of free market tax reform is going to necessarily affect those people, upper income people, more than lower income people. But if the end result is more economic growth, more job growth, more economic opportunity for people who are lower income, it's not a zero-sum game. It's a win-win. And that's a big part of what we need to be able to do. You and I know, Bill, that free markets have done more to lift people out of poverty than any other invention in the history of civilization, with the possible exception of the rule of law. But we never talk about capitalism that way. We tend to say, well, free markets are good because liberty is good. Or free markets are good because the Constitution limits the ability of the government to do stuff. Now look, I love the Constitution. I love liberty as an inherent good. But at the end of the day, if you want to persuade a broad swath of the public and a broad swath of Congress to go along with what you want to do, you actually have to go beyond those arguments. You have to talk about how liberty can make a difference in the lives of the people who actually need that economic mobility more than anyone else.
So you're going to try to make an argument to the center left that freedom delivers the goods.
That's right. And engage them on that, right? Because that's their argument. That the argument they make for more left-of-center policies is, well, we need to have a more redistributive economy. We need to strangle the economy with regulations because those are the things that protect lower-income individuals from the harm that greedy corporations can visit upon them, right? So what we have to be able to do is to engage that argument on that battlefield and say, look, we're going to take the argument to you. We believe that freedom and liberty and free markets and a free economy will do more to help people who are poor, people in the lower middle class, people who are trying to make ends meet. we believe our policies or our principles can do more for those individuals than your policies can. Let's have that debate. What we do say is we don't do that by and large. We just say liberty is good, the Constitution is good, and leave it at that.
Well, Avik, the flip side of arguing that free markets deliver economic growth and wealth for the country is the need for a safety net. Let's narrow the focus down to healthcare policy, which is a major focus of your efforts.
Sure.
Lyndon Johnson launched Medicare as part of his Great Society program back in the 60s to start addressing shortcomings in the safety net, and critics flawlessly predicted the actuarial disaster that would inevitably ensue. Has the government ever run an insurance program that was financially sound?
When it comes to the United States government, it's hard to think of a good example. Medicare and Medicaid are the two of the worst, if not the worst, insurance programs the government has run. So the answer to your question in short is no, the government has not done a good job. But a big part of why the government has not done a good job is because of the politics of it. LBJ had no concern at all for designing programs that were truly tailored to the safety net. Their agenda was nationalized health insurance in which the government controlled health care for everybody. That's not a safety net. That's something different. That's socialized medicine. That's single payer. That's different from saying, okay, for the people who are really poor, really sick, really disabled, let's make sure there's a safety net for them and let everyone else be in the free market.
So let's jump ahead to 50 years from LBJ's efforts and look at Obamacare. It seems to be heading for a death spiral. How do you analyze its current situation?
Yeah, the death spiral term is an unfortunate one because I think it makes people think that Obamacare will just self-destruct and vaporize and we won't have to deal with it anymore. As you know, Bill, that's not how government programs work. Ronald Reagan once said it really well when he said, the surest way to eternal life is to be a government bureau, right? Because government programs fail, quote unquote, and then what happens is Congress appropriates more money to fund them or creates more regulations to paper over the problems the first program created, and it becomes a different kind of spiral, but maybe not a death spiral. So that's where Obamacare is headed. Obamacare is definitely not living up to the hype. So when it was passed in 2010, the Congressional Budget Office, Washington's official bean counters, they predicted that 30 million more people would get health insurance as a result of Obamacare. It's far less than that today. It's probably more like 20 million, which when you consider how much money is being introduced into Obamacare, that's a significant gap. That means there's going to be 20 to 30 million people still uninsured after Obamacare is fully implemented. So what Obamacare is going to do, it's not going to go away. It's not going to self-vaporize, but it's not going to live up to the hype. The plans are, as you know, way more expensive than the proponents, the advocates, the optimists claim they'd be. And as a result, a lot of people can't afford them. And that problem is only going to get worse because the rates keep going up by 15%, 10%, 20% every year. That's not sustainable.
If we look around the world when we consider reforming Obamacare, which countries have done it right, and what can we learn from them?
Well, there are two countries in particular that I think provide us with models of how you can have a safety net but still maximize the degree to which the free market works in healthcare. And those two countries are Switzerland and Singapore. And I write about them in our new FREOPP white paper called Transcending Obamacare. What Switzerland and Singapore have done, they're slightly different, but what Switzerland and Singapore have done are very interesting. Let's take Switzerland first. Switzerland, there's no public option. There's no government-run health insurance company. The way Medicare is government-run insurance, the way Medicaid is government-run insurance. We keep talking about a public option. We already have public options in America. They're called Medicare and Medicaid. Well, Switzerland doesn't have any of that. Switzerland has private insurance. What they do is they use a sliding scale of subsidies to ensure that if you're really poor and you otherwise couldn't afford health insurance, the government will give you a voucher or a tax credit or whatever you want to call it to help defray the cost of your premiums. What they're basically doing is they're subsidizing the cost of health insurance for the bottom 20% of the population. That compares very favorably to the United States, where we subsidize the cost of health insurance for something like 90% of the population. You and me and everyone on Medicare and everyone on Medicaid and everyone on Obamacare is getting subsidized health insurance in one form or another. When you get health insurance from your employer, it's subsidized through the tax code. So we have this uniquely bad system in which we heavily subsidize health care for everybody. And the key, both in Switzerland and Singapore, is to subsidize health coverage for the very poor, but for everyone else have a free market system where you're buying health insurance if you want to. You're buying health care if you want to. In the case of Singapore, they take, like we have a payroll tax, right? So 10% or 13% of your income goes out of your paycheck every 2 weeks or every month and is deposited into the Social Security and Medicare systems, and the government spends it on your behalf. Well, what Singapore does is they have a payroll tax too, but instead of spending the money on your behalf, they deposit it in a health savings account, which you then control, and then you're able to spend the money on whatever health care you need. So they have a consumer-driven healthcare system that everyone participates in. And what's interesting about both Switzerland and Singapore is that fiscally, that basic idea, putting you in charge of your own healthcare dollars and not having the government pick for you what kind of insurance you have to buy or what kind of healthcare you want to buy. When you control those dollars, you spend them much more efficiently than the government does. And so the cost of the healthcare system in Switzerland is about half of what ours is. The cost of the healthcare system in Singapore is about a seventh of what ours is. And they have access to all the latest technology, complete choice of doctors, and very long life expectancy, and all the other things about high performance that we value in the United States. And so all that to say that, I think we've had this idea on the right among free marketeers that, well, the only way to provide universal coverage, to make sure that everyone has access to health insurance in the United States, is through more government. And so we recoil at the term universal coverage because we equate that with more government intervention. And the examples of Switzerland and Singapore show us that you could have dramatically less government intervention in the healthcare system and actually achieve much better results. And that shouldn't surprise us, right? Because as free marketeers, we understand that in the rest of the economy, that's how it works. The internet, TVs, smartphones, all these things exist and get cheaper every year and get better every year because of the free market. The healthcare system could be exactly the same way if we actually had something resembling a free market in healthcare, and we don't today.
Haven't all these same arguments been made for education? Let's use a voucher system. Let's make it consumer-centric. Let's tie the money to the student rather than the teachers' union. And hasn't that politically been a bust so far?
Well, it depends on what you mean. It's been a struggle to achieve competition and choice in schools. So in that sense, you could say it hasn't lived up to its potential. In terms of charter schools themselves, some schools have done well and some schools have not. Eva Moskowitz, with her Success Academy schools in New York, has done incredibly well. There you have poor kids in the Bronx and in Harlem outperforming some of the top public schools in the wealthiest counties in New York State. So some charter schools are successful, some are not. That's how markets work.
Oh, I wasn't questioning the success of charter schools. I was questioning the politics of taking away the ability of politicians to give away free stuff to their favorite constituencies.
Oh, of course. When it comes to healthcare, that's an incredibly important consideration, right? We have $3 trillion we spend on healthcare every year nationally, both public and private, of which about half is controlled by politicians. So, yeah, getting that control out of the hands of politicians and lobbyists and large corporations through their lobbyists and putting it back in the hands of consumers is incredibly difficult to do. So you have to do it gradually. And one of the big things about Transcending Obamacare, again, you can download the latest edition, the second edition of Transcending Obamacare at our website at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, which is FREOPP.org, FREOPP.org. One of the reasons why that plan is so detailed, the PDF is like 102 pages, is because in order to get you towards a free market system, you have to do it gradually. And you have to do it with a careful amount of craftsmanship in order to make sure that you don't create these New York Times headlines of the person who's going to lose their health insurance, the single mother with multiple sclerosis, et cetera. You want to make sure that you give people enough time over a gradual period to say, okay, I'm going to have more options now. Let me move to a health insurance plan that the private market is generating that's better for my needs and suits me better than what the government is offering. But you have to do it gradually. If you just repeal everything and then replace, the challenge is a lot of people could fall through the cracks, and that could actually diminish the appetite for reform rather than increase it.
So, Avik, I've had a chance to read through Transcending Obamacare. It is an incredibly detailed document. It makes a lot of strong recommendations. What are the political prospects for the passage of a program like that, either under a Hillary Clinton or a Donald Trump administration?
Well, Hillary Clinton has already stated that her goal is to move Obamacare to the left. So obviously that's not that's not exactly compatible with what I'm pitching. However, if there's a Republican Congress and a Hillary Clinton, it's at least theoretically possible that on some small components of transcending Obamacare, you could see some positive movement. You could see Congress, for example, pitch some ways to liberalize the insurance markets so that they're less overregulated than they are today. And you could imagine that it's conceivably possible for Hillary Clinton to sign such measures, especially given the death spiral that you've talked about with the Obamacare exchanges. In a Trump administration, it's just tougher to know because Trump himself, as we all know who follow this stuff, has not exactly been a policy wonk on any issue, let alone healthcare. And healthcare, the details really matter. It's one thing to say, oh, let's have a free market in healthcare. Oh, let's have a public option. Or, oh, let's have universal coverage, whatever it is. Oh, let's repeal and replace Obamacare. These bullet points, these bumper stickers are great, but the devil really is in the details in healthcare. And Trump has not shown an interest in the details. So it's hard to know. The one thing I will say about Trump is that Trump has actually come out in favor of socialized medicine. He loves the British system, which is total socialized medicine. He supports universal coverage, which isn't inherently bad, as I've argued. But maybe there's room, if he were open to it, to a team of people working in a Trump administration to work with Paul Ryan and the Senate to try to pass something that would be more aligned with what we're talking about.
Avik, if you look at the healthcare market, it's dominated by behemoths, and behemoths are not well known for innovation. Mm-hmm. What role do entrepreneurs have to play in reforming healthcare?
Oh, they have an enormous role to play in innovating healthcare, precisely because healthcare is so dominated by behemoths. When you have very large bureaucratic institutions that are cronyistic in their orientation, basically running the healthcare system, technology, particularly digital technology and the internet, are allowing software entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs to come in and disrupt little pockets of the healthcare system. And when you have a $3 trillion healthcare system, 0.001% of $3 trillion is still a lot of money. So there's a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs to come in. And we're starting to see that, particularly, again, on the digital side. But to get there, again, we have to do a lot with regulation. So actually, there's a whole chapter in Transcending Obamacare about how to actually take advantage of internet and digital technologies to revolutionize the way we deliver healthcare in the United States. And we're just scratching the surface of that today because there are so many federal regulations, particularly the HIPAA law, which is a healthcare privacy law, and anti-kickback laws, which have a lot of perverse, unintended consequences that prevent entrepreneurs from taking advantage of gaps in the digital side of healthcare to actually make the patient experience better.
Avik, you've given us a lot to think about. Good luck with your new foundation, and good luck with your new arrival, your new baby at home.
Oh, thanks so much, Bill, and best of luck to you. It's really an honor to be with you today.
That was Avik Roy, president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Real Clear Radio Hour is a not-for-profit, donor-supported program produced in conjunction with Real Clear Politics, America's premier independent political website. To make sure you don't miss any of our shows, stop by realclearradio.org and sign up for updates. Today's program was partially underwritten by the generous support of Donors Trust, the donor-advised fund committed to promoting a free society. For more information, visit donorstrust.org. Ahead, Lee Goodman, member and former chair of the Federal Election Commission, describes his struggle to defend free speech from partisan regulators. Stay tuned.